April of 2010, Manchester was rocked by the brutal murder of 12-year-old Tia Rigg. Locals would have been even more horrified when it was revealed who had killed the youngster. Tia Rigg was a popular 12-year-old student. She would be described by her loved ones as a happy girl who was strong-willed and free-spirited. She enjoyed watching football, especially Manchester United, and was a loving and compassionate big sister to her younger siblings. Tia lived at home with her mother as well as her 3 younger siblings and her grandparents. It was the 3rd of April 2010, when John Maiden, Tia's uncle, called up Lynn and asked if Tia could come to his home to babysit his 10-year-old daughter. Lynn agreed and Tia was sent over to her uncle's home, which was located about 100 yards away. Tia was excited to see her uncle and was hoping they would watch the Manchester United vs Chelsea football match that was scheduled for that afternoon. Maiden, however, had other plans for Tia. He had been harboring sadistic fantasies. Before Maiden invited his niece over that afternoon, he had studied a how-to-kill guide and had extensively researched ways to drug people. At her uncle's home, Tia would be subjected to a horrifying sexual assault, resulting in her murder. At 3:45 p.m., Maiden calmly called 999 and stated, "Hi, I would like to report a murder." He gave the 911 operator his name and address before saying, "My niece has been murdered by me. I have just finished killing her now." The 911 operator asked Maiden why he had killed his niece, to which he replied, "Because I felt like it," before hanging up. When police officers arrived at the crime scene, Maiden opened the front door and invited them inside. They would describe Maiden as chillingly calm, as he led them up the stairs and into a spare bedroom. On the bedroom floor was the lifeless body of Tia, surrounding in a puddle of her own blood. She was nude except for a pair of socks. It was evident that she was deceased. A guitar string was wrapped tightly around her neck and her hands had been crudely bound behind her back. Maiden admitted to the police that he had raped and killed Tia but claimed that he heard voices, one of which was good and one of which was bad. The autopsy would determine that Tia had been dead for less than an hour, meaning that she had been attacked almost as soon as she entered the home. The stab wounds to her stomach had caused severe internal injuries and several of these wounds had been inflicted while Tia was still alive. While Tia had suffered from severe blood loss, her ultimate cause of death would be strangulation via ligature. Lynn would rush to the crime scene where she could be heard screaming "Why?" repeatedly before collapsing to the floor. All murders are terrible, but when it's a 12-year-old girl, it's just horrendous, said Detective Superintendent Mary Doyle, who was leading the murder investigation. Following the service, Tia was buried at Southern Cemetery where 12 balloons were released, one to symbolize each year of her life. Shortly before he was scheduled to go to trial, John Maiden would plead guilty to the rape and murder of Tia Rigg. During his sentencing hearing, details of Tia's last terrifying moments on Earth were read aloud. Maiden would be sentenced to life imprisonment with the recommendation that he never be released. After Tia's murder, it would be revealed that she was well known to Child Protection Services and that she and her siblings had been placed on the Child Protection Register. In 2011, a serious case inquiry would be carried out to try and determine if Tia's death could have been prevented. The findings of the inquiry would be highly critical of Salford's Child Protection Services and would essentially find that Tia had been let down by several child protection agencies, including Salford where she had previously lived. The inquiry acknowledged that while these missed opportunities did not directly lead to Tia's death, they had increased the risk of neglect that she had faced during her short life. They would find that Tia's mother, Lynn, had a long history of drug abuse and that removing Tia and her siblings from her care should have been very seriously considered. No one could have predicted what happened to her when she visited her uncle that day, but we know more could have been done during her childhood to support her in coping with her unstable home life, said Councillor John Merry. However, even if this child has been removed from her home, she would not have been prevented from having contact with her family, as there was no indication she was at risk from her uncle and therefore no reason to stop her having access to him and other members of the extended family. Removing her from her home would therefore not have prevented her death. Daniel Patton, 31, killed his former girlfriend, Regan Tierney, at the home they once shared in Walkden, Greater Manchester, in June 2019. Just moments after, he phoned her granddad and confessed, telling him he would need to come and collect their 2 children. A short time later, Mr. Patton called the police and told them he was going to hang himself. He was later found critically injured by officers who attended the scene, and died in hospital a few days later. An inquest at Bolton Coroner's Court heard that Mr. Patton had been left heartbroken and destroyed after Miss Tierney, 27, ended their decade-long relationship. In the days leading up to the tragedy, the court heard that he had discovered Regan had formed a new relationship with another man. His family told the hearing that despite his devastation, Daniel's attitude to life had in fact started to improve, and he was making plans for the future, such as moving into a new flat and applying for a promotion at work. But in the early hours of June 5, 2019, despite telling his dad he was getting an early night, Mr. Patton drove to Regan's home. The court heard he let himself into the property through the garage, for which he still had a key, and stabbed his former partner to death. After making the call to Miss Tierney's granddad, her father David rushed to the house where he found his daughter fatally injured in her bedroom. It was only when police arrived at the property a short time later that Mr. Patton was discovered having hanged himself in the garage. He was taken to hospital and treated on a critical dependency unit, but died as a result of a catastrophic brain injury 2 days later on June 7. Mr. Patton described his son as an amazing father, who was always very hands-on with his and Regan's 2 children. But when Miss Tierney reportedly ended their relationship and asked him to move out, Daniel was absolutely heartbroken, Mr. Patton told the court. He rented a storage unit and put his belongings in there. He was concerned about the separation and not being able to see his children. He said he had realized the split was definite and he knew she was seeing someone else. He was destroyed. He was absolutely heartbroken, Mr. Patton said. He had set up a family group chat and was planning to find his own flat to move into. His sister Melissa said her brother had started to perk up. But in the days leading up to his death, it's thought Daniel's positive mood may have been shattered by a number of posts on Facebook relating to Miss Tierney's new partner. The inquest heard Mr. Patton was aware of a photo on the social media site confirming Regan's new relationship. His friend had told the court that on May 3, when he sent a message asking if Daniel was coming to the gym, he received a reply saying, "No mate, head's gone." On the evening of June 4, Daniel had arrived home at his father's flat where he had been staying, and reportedly drunk 2 beers before heading to bed. He said he was going to get an early night and go to work early in the morning as he had an appraisal with his boss. He went to bed and I fell asleep on the sofa. I went to bed at 2 a.m. and assumed Daniel was in bed. Daniel's friend said that at 6 a.m. the following morning his dad came round and said Daniel had been involved in an accident. Officers had found a knife inside Daniel's tracksuit pocket with Regan's blood on it. Toxicology results showed Mr. Patton had a small level of alcohol in his blood and had most likely smoked cannabis in the days before his death. Home Office pathologist, Dr. Charles Wilson, concluded he had died from a hypoxic ischemic brain injury caused by hanging. Recording a conclusion of suicide, coroner Dr. Alan Walsh said he believed Mr. Patton had snapped and that his actions on the night of his death were completely out of character. He had a turbulent relationship, but he was a devoted father, and all he ever wanted was a happy family with Regan and their 2 children. They had their problems, but they got back together many times. There were missed opportunities to protect the young mum before she was stabbed to death by her ex-partner in a horrific murder-suicide, a report has concluded. Miss Tierney had been subjected to years of abuse at the hands of Patton before she finally found the strength to leave him and move on with a new partner. Her family allege Patton struggled to accept his relationship had ended. Just days before her death, Regan made a phone call to police reporting that he had threatened to put her head on a stick, believing she was in danger. But a 3-day delay to record the report meant that by the time the force made contact with her, Miss Tierney had lost confidence and decided not to take the matter further. During their 10-year relationship, Regan was subject to coercive and controlling behavior, intimidation, verbal abuse, physical violence, and threats at the hands of Patton. But despite disclosing that she had been the victim of domestic violence to several professionals, the review found that Miss Tierney was never referred to specialist domestic abuse services.